the bill would take effect upon publication in the statute book.
Thank you, Tamara. Committee, are there any questions about the specifics of the bill? Senator Petty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Tamara, my question has to do with the item you just dealt with, the reporting, and I know that starts on page 4, line 31. So could you clarify for me when it says each qualified school, we're no longer talking about school district, we're talking by individual school?
A qualified school is a non-public school that has been approved to participate in this program. So it's not the public school that would be required to do this, it's those private schools that these students attend.
Okay, thank you.
Do you have a follow-up question?
So 31 through 35 is speaking specifically to private school.
Correct. If you look on page 2 of the bill, starting in line 10, that's where the definition of a qualified school is. And it starts out, it means any non-public school and lists those requirements. So it is a non-public school.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, we are going to go ahead and start with testimony. We will start with proponent testimony. First up is Ross Izzard of ACE Scholarships. And for all of those testifying today, we have, when you're down to 30 seconds, we'll have a little sign there for you. So welcome, Ross.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Can you guys hear me okay?
We can.
Okay, excellent. I never quite sure if my technology is going to work, so good to hear. So thank you for the chance to be with you today. I apologize for not being able to be there in person, but I am thankful for the chance to speak with you virtually. My name is Ross Izzard. I'm the Vice President of Policy and Government Affairs for ACE Scholarships. ACE is a nonprofit scholarship granting organization that provides privately funded K-12 scholarships to more than 6,000 students attending 800 diverse schools in 8 states. That includes about 300 kids attending roughly 81 private schools across the state of Kansas. So we are one of the primary proponents of Senate Bill 61, and I wanted to offer some testimony in support of the bill and walk you through why we are looking for the changes that the bill makes. So as the revisor mentioned, there are 2 big changes that Senate Bill 61 makes, and I'll hit the first one first, which is that it raises student income eligibility from the free lunch line at 130% of federal poverty, which is extremely low, to 185% of the federal poverty line, which aligns with the free and reduced price lunch guidelines from the federal government. We're supportive of this change for 3 reasons. The first one being that it aligns more realistically with the disadvantaged communities that we serve. So the average family who comes to ACE looking for a scholarship has an income of about $35,000 for a family of 4. That is actually above the current limit that this program sets, which is just about at $34,000. It is the lowest income eligibility threshold in the nation, so there is no other scholarship tax credit program like this that sets income eligibility quite so low. And we are hoping to get it back into alignment with other programs, as well as get it to a place where it can reflect the financial realities faced by families, where there's not much difference between being super low income and low income in terms of their ability to actually pay tuition. The second change is eliminating that public school list that was mentioned earlier. The reason we're looking to do that is twofold. The first is that list is fundamentally unfair. It, because of the way school boundaries are drawn in Kansas, can mean that students from the same neighborhood with the same economic needs, who face the same challenges, shop in the same stores, go to the same churches, are not able to get scholarships in some cases because they live on the wrong side of a residential street. They can have their eligibility determined by a matter of feet, which for a program designed to serve low-income kiddos obviously is not ideal. Beyond that, because that list actually requires them to come from elementary schools, it effectively means that anybody who comes from middle or high schools has missed a train that they didn't know was coming, right? So we serve many kids who come from those later grades who are looking for new opportunities, for new places to go to school. And the fact that they have to come from an elementary school essentially means that if they are above the grade of 5, they're just not going to have a shot. We think that that is fundamentally out of alignment with both the needs of the families that we serve and also not a particularly fair way for policy to handle families in need. I do want to use the last little bit of time that I have here before we cut off to talk about what
you're out of time, so I need you to wrap it up.
Yes, ma'am. Appreciate your time today. We are very supportive of this bill. I would like to point out before I get off that it makes no fiscal changes. It should not cause any fiscal impacts on the state. Appreciate your support. Happy to answer any questions you might have.
Okay, we'll get to questions after all of the proponents speak. Thank you. Next up, we have Mike McShane with Ed Choice.
Hello, good afternoon. Can everyone hear me okay? Thank you for the nod there. My name is Michael McShane. I'm Director of National Research at EdChoice. Each year, we at EdChoice publish the ABCs of school choice, a kind of physician's desk reference for private school choice programs. We offer a detailed description of every private school choice program in the country, as well as enrollment information. Having access to that information helps us to understand how programs compare to each other. Given that there's discussion today about changing the eligibility criteria for students participating in the program, I'd like to describe how other tax credit programs across the country use family income and public school performance as an eligibility criteria. There are 24 tax credit scholarship programs offered by 19 states across the country. Of those, 16 have income limits. Of those income limits, Kansas has the most stringent income limits for participating families. When it comes to public school performance as an eligibility criteria, of the 24 tax credit scholarship programs, 20 of them do not take public school performance into account. Only 4 do, and only 2, Kansas and 1 in Pennsylvania, use the determining factor. So that means programs in Arizona, Florida, Georgia, Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, Louisiana, Montana, New Hampshire, Nevada, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, South Carolina, South Dakota, Utah, Virginia, Alabama, Oklahoma, all have either higher income limits or no income limits and no public school performance requirement when it comes to eligibility. Putting these data together shows that as it's currently administered, the Kansas Tax Credit for Low-Income Student Scholarship Program is an outlier, both in how stringent its income eligibility is set and the degree to which that it relies on a child's own public school performance. I hope this information was helpful. I hope this information is helpful as you make your decisions and deliberations. Thank you very much.
So well timed. Thank you. Michael Westcott now, Support Catholic Schools, is here. Michael's here in person. Thank you for being here today. Very much. Now I'm going to call on Libby Cox, Catholic Education Foundation. Libby, thank you for being here.
We are proponents of the changes proposed in SB 61. We currently manage and fund scholarships for 300 students in 17 different schools throughout Northeast Kansas. We believe that the proposed changes in this legislation will accomplish more fair and equitable treatment of Kansas students in K-12 that are living in poverty. That's what the bill was designed for, and that's what we hope that you'll consider expanding. There are a couple of problems that the previous folks have noted. I want to add a couple of new things. SB 61 has no fiscal effect on the existing legislation. It does not cost Kansas taxpayers any additional money. The changes are merely to the requirements of eligibility for the students themselves. We currently fund 300 scholarships for this tax credit scholarship program, but we have also turned away at least 200 students because they lived outside the boundaries of the 100 schools list that was mentioned earlier. So obviously there's a significant problem with students being able to utilize the program, which they were intended to because of their low income status, and the ability to offer parents a choice in their child's education when they had currently attended a failing school. One other point to make is that despite the small number of students that participate, the results of this program are outstanding and very effective. 99% of our students graduate from high school compared to 70 to 77% of their neighboring schools. And additionally, 95% of the scholarships that we award go to minority students. So we ask your consideration to expand this program. We know that it will benefit the students that we've worked with and many more students that are in the low-income classifications. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you so much. Next up, we have Dr. Dela Shropshire of Holy Savior Catholic Academy. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the Senate Education Committee.
Pull that mic a little bit closer because we're hearing that not everyone can hear us virtually.
Okay, how is this? Better? I am Dr. Delia Shropshire, President of Holy Savior Catholic Academy in the Diocese of Wichita. I am humbled and honored to speak on behalf of school choice and what it means to our inner core Catholic schools. First and foremost, the impact on families has been tremendous, and that families who would not normally have the opportunity to enroll their children in a Catholic school now have that choice. I might add that my students are also now watching, so. We know that it is not about public versus private, it's public and private. It's about our children being successful. We also know that every child develops, learns, and flourishes in different environments. With this opportunity, we can ensure that every child has the chance to learn, grow, and develop in an academic environment that meets their needs academically, culturally, socially, emotionally, and spiritually. This year, our number of tax credit students increased in our school by 50%, while many other schools' enrollment declined due to COVID-19. In the Adverse Childhood Experience Study, ACEs, it has been identified that children who live in poverty experience more stress and trauma than children who do not. Childhood trauma and stress adversely impact the brain, and the brain cannot recover until certain social emotional conditions are met, according to brain scans and medical studies. Children at risk, in trauma, or under stress will not learn, not refuse to learn, but cannot learn until they are in an environment where they feel accepted. School choice is necessary for families to match a learning environment with their child's needs so they can learn and be successful. Every child that becomes a successful contributing member of society saves the state millions of dollars. We have a student who has entered our school through this wonderful opportunity from a low-income family. He's an African-American male. He has academic and social-emotional challenges. The stresses were difficult for him. He did not have tools to positively express himself. With a classroom of 12-to-1 ratio and many positive adults, and our school resource, who we've been able to add due to funding, he receives the support and help he needs. Imagine how many more students we can help if the law is expanded to families who qualify for reduced lunches. There are many reduced lunch eligible families each year who inquire to enroll in our school but cannot afford to. These families would be the beneficiaries of this bill. Imagine how more successful we can be. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you so much. Last up, we have Wilfredo Sanchez, a parent, and I believe that she is virtual. Sanchez, are you there?
Hi, my name is Adriana, and I am a volunteer here at Christ the King Classical School. I will be translating Mr. Sanchez's testimony for you.
Okay, we cannot hear, so I need you to move closer to the mic or turn up the volume, please.
Can you hear us now?
Use that outside voice for us, okay?
Okay, are you able to hear us now?
There we go. Great.
Okay. Okay, as I said previously, my name is Adriana, and I am a volunteer here at Christ the King Classical School. I will be translating Mr. Sanchez's testimony for you today.
Okay.
Gracias, presidente y miembros del comité. Gracias, soy Wilfredo, vivo en Kansas City, Kansas. Tengo 3 hijos. Queríamos que nuestros 3 hijos asistieran a la escuela católica Christ the King en Kansas City, Kansas, porque nos gusta la escuela y pensamos que les ayudaría a nuestros hijos con sus estudios. Nuestros primos fueron a Christ the King y estaban recibiendo una buena educación y estaban felices.
Thank you. I am Wilfredo Sanchez. I live in Kansas City, Kansas, and I have 3 children. We wanted our 3 boys to attend Christ the King Parish School in Kansas City, Kansas, because we liked the school and thought it would help our boys do well with their studies. Our cousins went to Christ the King School, and they were getting a good education, and they were happy.
Nunca nos imaginamos que pudiéramos pagar la matrícula para una educación en nuestra escuela. Nuestros hijos califican para almuerzo gratis. Hablamos con la directora Mr. Christian y nos dijo del crédito de impuestos del programa de becas para estudiantes de bajos ingresos del estado de Kansas. Después averiguamos que solo uno de nuestros hijos calificaría para este crédito porque está en kindergarten. Nos dio mucha tristeza saber que nuestros gemelos que entrarían al 7º grado no calificarían para esta beca, porque la escuela pública a la cual asistieron el año anterior no estaba en la lista. No entendimos por qué hay una lista de esas escuelas. La escuela secundaria de la que vinieron no estaba en la lista, así que la beca no nos pudo ayudar.
We never thought we could afford tuition for an education at Christ the King. Our children qualify for free lunch at school. We talked to the principal, Mrs. Fithian, and she told us about the Kansas tax credit scholarships for students on free lunch that could help our children attend the school that we thought would be best for them. Then we learned that only one of our children could get the tax credit scholarship because he was in kindergarten. We were sad to learn that our twin boys that you see here today going into 7th grade could not get this scholarship because the school they went to last year was not on a list. They did not go to the right school on a list from the previous year. We didn't understand why there is a list of those schools. The middle school they came from was not on the list, so the scholarship would not help us.
Es nuestra esperanza que esta beca cambie para que familias como la nuestra puedan recibir estas becas para todos sus hijos, no importando a qué escuela asistieran el año anterior. Por favor, cambien la ley para que todos los niños que califiquen para este crédito de impuestos reciban esta ayuda. Gracias.
We hope that the scholarship can be changed so that families with children in school can get these scholarships for all of the children, no matter where they went to school the previous year. Please change the law so that all the children that need help can qualify for tax credit scholarships. Thank you sincerely.
Very much for your testimony. Committee, that ends our verbal proponent testimony. I will remind you that we have 12 written letters of testimony as proponents. At this time, I'm sorry. And you.
Frontier Peace Advisors. I simply want to ask the committee written testimony in support of today's bill. I didn't see any prior listing of the bill number on the announcements for this hearing.
You may submit written testimony and make sure that our committee assistant, Cindy Rexler, gets it, and she will upload it for us. Thank you very much. I'm now going to open it up for questions of any of our proponents. What questions do we have? Senator Gossage.
Actually, this may be more for the provisor, but my question is, of course, we consider people with free lunch in poverty level, but do we consider people who are at reduced lunch at poverty level?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the way that it works is free lunch is 130% of the poverty level and below. And for reduced lunch, it's between 130 and 185% of poverty level.
Okay, so they are not in poverty. Just wanted to be clear. And then what percentage of students in public schools today receive reduced lunch?
That's a question you'd have to ask the department.
Okay, thank you.
That is a request we need to make from the Department of Education. Other questions? Senator Sykes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This may be a question for research, but my understanding with COVID, we have opened up free and reduced lunch for just about anyone. If the administration decided to extend this in the future, would this then in fact open it up to every student in Kansas? So I just want clarification on that.
I can tell you that from superintendents of school districts, the eligibility for free lunch and reduced lunch is by the parents filling out a form. They still, regardless of COVID, have had parents fill those forms out because that again is tethered to the at-risk funding. Providing lunches for children during COVID is something that's being funded through the money that has come from the federal grants. So two very different things. Receiving lunch because we're in COVID is federal funding. Free and reduced is something very different. It's simply that measure that it does impact funds that come in for the lunches, milk, reduced cost in milk, but it is used to tether specifically for that funding for at-risk kids.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. And this question would be for any of the proponents. Our public schools have, they have to follow, oversight. We have legislative post audits looking at funding, how they're using at-risk dollars. My question is, would you be opposed to putting something in the bill, making sure that the private schools also had that accountability requirement? Also, a question on making sure that you're not able to deny someone based on religion, gender, sexual orientation, or performance. So I would be happy for anyone to answer those questions.
Anyone that wants to answer those? Do I have someone virtual or do I have Dr. Shropshire? Would you like to address that?
Yes, based on our school and other schools' makeup, we are 50% of other faith traditions. So the students are able to come. There's no discrimination based on gender or sex or religion for them to participate in the program, if I answered your question correctly.
There's another question about reporting or accountability, if you will.
Repeat that question for me.
So our public schools, we have a legislative post audit. We're looking at the way they use tax dollars. Would you be amenable if we put requirements in there that you had to also follow those same guidelines?
There's no opposition to that.
Any other questions? Did I have someone virtual that wanted to speak up, please?
Yeah, Madam Chair, I apologize. I'm not sure if I should raise my hand or what the procedure is for those of us who are virtual, but just to
please introduce yourself for us for the record.
Yes, ma'am. Ross Izzard, ACE Scholarships.
Okay.
On the accountability front, I think that it's important to remember that all private schools participating in this program need to be accredited. That came into force this past July, last summer. So every school that is participating on the private side already needs to go through accreditation. Most of those processes include at least some work on how they handle their financials, how they set up their business, their general practices when it comes to day-to-day operations. And those accrediting bodies are selected by and approved by the Kansas Department of Education. So I believe there is already a check there. And beyond that, to Dr. Shropshire's point, all private schools and all SGOs are bound by federal anti-discrimination law the same way that all other entities are. So we have to follow those same federal requirements in terms of how and when we process applications and students at all times.
Last question for proponent, Senator Gossage, and then we're going to move to opponent testimony.
Thank you. Just a clarification. It was mentioned that there is no fiscal effect. So forgive my ignorance, but I'm trying to understand from whence the scholarships come.
So would our revisor or would research like to share that information?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll go ahead. The way that the program works is private individuals donate money to a scholarship granting organization, and then that organization provides scholarships to these students.
All right, we are going to move on now to our opponent testimony. We're going to start with G.A. Bowie, USA, Kansas, and Kansas School Supreme, or Superintendent Association, sorry. Made you a Supreme there.
Well, thanks for the opportunity to visit with you regarding the expansion of this bill. I appreciate the time today. You know, public schools, you see my testimony, the public schools and private schools have a good partnership. We work together in many opportunities. Our private school partners are, we help provide special education services to our private school partners. We provide opportunities for enrichment and advanced courses for many of our partners. We provide transportation, we help with facilities, even food service in some of our smaller private school programs. So to think there's not a partnership already out there, I think that may be a misnomer that falls. There's a great partnership, and we do work together. And we, in our organization, we have private school members. Some of our principals are members of our organization, and we connect with the superintendent of the Wichita Diocese as well. She connects with our superintendents during many of our conversations. So there is a connection out there with our private schools. So I want to make that out there first. But as we look at expanding this program to include at-risk and more importantly, allowing students to leave a school that may be performing at a higher rate to go to a private school that's not performing at the same level or at a lower rate, I think creates a challenge that maybe we're not looking at closely enough. Originally, this bill is stated, as the revisor stated, it was originally with the lowest performing 100 schools, and they had to go to students at those schools could transfer to another school. Well, at the current rate, at the current adjustments in the schedule, that a student could be at a higher performing public school and could transfer to a lower performing private school. And I think that inhibits some of the things that we're looking at, is trying to enrich the opportunities for our at-risk students that are out there. And again, I could go on and let other folks talk about some of the at-risk opportunities that we have in our public schools. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Bowie. I'm going to call on Aaron Gould, Game On, for Kansas Schools. Aaron, you are virtual. Thank you for being here today.
Hi. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I represent Game On for Kansas Schools. We're a parent-led public education advocacy group. And when this program was first introduced a few years ago, the scope was intentionally narrow to solve a specific problem for a very specific group of students. And while the goal is admirable, this program is unusual in how it works. In no other part of our public life do we expect the government to pay for an alternative solution to the public option. And just as we do not give money to people to buy books if they prefer not to use the library, we don't believe that the state should provide funds for private schools because some families prefer not to use our public schools. And if families believe that there are improvements that are needed in our educational system, that we should invest in the public schools to ensure that all children can benefit. And this bill greatly expands the current scholarship program by lifting both the student and school-specific restrictions. This change expands, and I did a little quick math using state reports on the website, school websites, that this change expands the population of potential scholarship students from roughly 25,500 students to more than 219,000 students, without requiring that those students provide any evidence that there's an academic need for the state to provide them with a private school education. And as Mr. Bowie stated, it is possible now with this change to move from a higher performing public school to a lower performing private school, and we just don't think that's a good use of public funds. This current program documentation also does not
30
show
seconds,
any.
please.
Wait, I'm sorry, how many?
30 seconds.
Wow. I only get 2 minutes? Okay. That there's.
Everybody gets 2 minutes.
Oh, I thought it was 3. That there are no requirements for the schools in the curriculum. They're allowed to exclude students. They do not have to identify that parents are waiving their IDEA rights when applying to this program. And there is absolutely no accountability to prove that this program is actually serving the specific cohort of scholarship students. There are no reports at the Board of Education's performance level reporting that shows that these students are in fact improving. And we just don't see that it makes sense to increase a program that has no evidence that it works.
Okay, thank you very much. Next up is Richard Profit from USD 250. That's the Pittsburgh Community Schools. Richard is also the KSSA Board of Directors member. Richard, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you, Madam Chairman and committee. The two opponents before me, of course, stole a lot of the things that I wanted to say, and I do not want to repeat. I am the superintendent of the largest school district in Southeast Kansas. We have over 3,000 students, but also in our community, we have 3 private parochial schools. I want to echo what Mr. Bowie had said, that we have a great relationship with those schools. We share resources and we share students. As a matter of fact, we have some of the students who cannot be offered in the private schools some of the courses that they would like to take, and we gladly accept them into our school to be able to take those. So we've got a mutually beneficial relationship with them. But there is a strong correlation that we're talking about today between performance level and income level. Whether you are in public or private school, economically disadvantaged students tend to score lower than their peers. No matter what the student's educational setting is, those economically disadvantaged students are more likely to struggle academically, and public schools are equipped to deal with those issues, and we're obligated to provide them. Now, in the end, there's not a lot of strong evidence in Kansas that private schools are outperforming their public school counterparts, especially when socioeconomic factors are taken into consideration. We're all wrestling with the challenges that our students face, and we try to overcome these obstacles to improve student achievement on a daily basis, and it's an ongoing struggle. Since there's little demonstration of the evidence of a benefit for economically disadvantaged students to make improvements in achievement by switching their attendance center, I have difficulty with the broadening of the language as presented in this bill. With the new language, it would open up some opportunities for for-profit organizations to be able to persuade students and families to attend school that have not proven that they help with any significant gains. So introducing new legislation would reduce general fund revenues in public schools. It would result in a decreased ability for those schools to focus on the students with the greatest needs, and seems counterproductive. I believe that these funds would be better served to improve special education programs, at-risk programs, and early childhood programs in the public schools. I thank you for your time and would be happy to answer questions later.
Thank you very much. Next up, we have Michael Papa, Mainstream Coalition. Michael, thank you for being with us today.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify virtually before you today. My name is Michael Popa, Executive Director of Mainstream Coalition, and I've also submitted written testimony for your review. Mainstream Coalition opposes SB 61, making further changes to expand the tax credit for low-income student scholarship program, as we have stood in opposition to the original program in 2014 and successive attempts to expand it. I will do my best not to repeat anything, but some of these do bear a little bit of of repeating. It's our collective duty to protect and uphold the rights of all children to affordable, equitable, and excellent public education. And so this sentiment, as well as additional concerns that I bring forward today, they're shared by Kansans from a range of political, ideological, and religious identities from across the state. And among those are that SB 61 undermines public education and prosperity for Kansas children and families. Because these additional public dollars that would be diverted to fund private and parochial schools would be better invested in public education programs and services that are proven to increase positive education and socioeconomic outcomes, especially for at-risk and low-income students. The bill creates further inequity in education. It intentionally expands the diversion of this taxpayer money to fund private and often parochial schools. As I mentioned, these schools are not held to the same standards, requirements, and accountability as Kansas public schools. Mainstream Coalition upholds the separation of church and state as one of our founding principles. Our objections to the original program remain that this bill intends in part to expand the use of taxpayer dollars to fund private and religious schools with no regard for student outcomes, and it perpetuates discrimination. There are no requirements in place right now that would prevent a private or parochial school that receives public funding from subsequently rejecting students and families on the basis of gender, sexual orientation, gender identity. There is no empirical evidence to support this expansion. And we ask that if you seek to increase opportunities for education excellence, we urge you to reject SB 61. Instead, we ask that you champion data-driven efforts that are proven to increase positive socioeconomic outcomes like fully funded public education and early childhood programs, and increased access to healthcare, mental health, and disability services. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Next up, we have Mary Sinclair, Kansas PTA. Thank you for being here today, Mary.
Hi. Thank you for allowing me to address the committee on behalf of the Kansas PTA. My name is Mary Sinclair, and allow me to draw your attention to a couple of our primary concerns noted in the testimony we submitted without being too redundant. The approved legislative platform opposes the use of public dollars for private and non-public schools, largely because private schools are not required to accept and they can discriminate in their admissions. Private schools can ask parents to waive their children's access to special education services as a function of admissions, and private schools can operate under different rules of transparency and accountability. Under the current law, if I understand it correctly, program participants are really not required to report any data on student performance. Secondly, beyond these issues of inequity, we are unaware of any data on the impact of the Kansas program since its inception in 2000. And any empirical evidence that is available in other states warrants against the implementation of voucher programs. Recent studies in Louisiana, Indiana, Ohio, Wisconsin, and DC have found that students who participate in voucher type programs show no improvement in reading or math over those who are not in the program, worse academic outcomes than their comparable peers. And I can provide links to all of those studies if you're interested, Madam Chair. Our third main question in regard to the proposed changes in the scholarship eligibility, I believe they've been mentioned, they seem to run contrary to the original rationale for establishing the program. So current law targets struggling schools as a proxy for struggling students, and this bill would allow any student to access these public dollars for private school tuition, regardless of the performance of the public school they attend. It's actually quite possible that fewer at-risk students would be chosen by private schools to access these scholarship dollars. The same students could be transferring to lower performing schools, less capable of meeting their needs, but we don't know this because the accountability data is not available, not required. So in closing, the tax credit scholarship program, we believe in reality really gives choice to private non-public schools rather than to the parents. And as parents and taxpayers, it seems that the prudent course of action would be to commit to the Gannon school finance resolution, continue to restore state efforts. Oh, I'm sorry, am I out?
Yes, you have been for a little.
Okay, so I would just ask that we support the Gannon and focus on providing opportunity for all of our students in Kansas rather than just a select few. Thank you so much for your time.
Next up, we have Mark Tallman, Kansas Association of School Boards. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I wish I could be there in person. Well, I guess I could be, but I thought I'd leave the space for others and look forward to seeing you all in person. Very quickly, like to hit a couple of points today. Some of the proponents have talked about this being a program helping kids in poverty, but in fact, the change to reduced eligibility means there would be less a requirement to be more deeply in poverty. Second, although we've never liked the limiting this to a list of so-called failing schools, what you can see on the back of my testimony is that these schools by and large have high percentages of high poverty students who are the most likely to struggle in school. So removing this limitation is pretty much inevitably going to mean you're going to have a pool of kids less likely to have high needs. Third, one of the suggestions was we need programs like this to help students that are struggling. That's true, but there's nothing in the bill or nothing in the current program or bill that requires a student to actually be struggling or at risk, only low income. And finally, it was suggested, and I completely agree, to be successful, a student needs to be accepted. The difference is, under the bill now in current law, it's up to the school to decide whether to accept a student. Public schools don't have that choice, and I think the suggestion of going forward to make sure it is clear that all students need to be accepted would be very positive. Would simply note, as I looked up in answer to one of the questions, right now about 35% of Kansas public school kids are eligible for free meals, 9% are eligible for reduced meals. Be happy to answer questions at the appropriate time.
So well timed. Thank you very much, Mr. Tallman. Last up, we have Mike Fulton, Superintendent of the Shawnee Mission School District. Mike, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Mike Fulton, Superintendent of the Shawnee Mission School District. Well, America has a long tradition of public education, funded by tax dollars and governed by locally elected boards of education. And public schools benefit the entire community, not just households with school-aged children. Funding to educate children in public schools comes from taxpayers, with locally elected boards of education charged with ensuring that every child is served, including at-risk children and those with special needs. No child is discriminated against, that public dollars are spent in the most efficient and effective manner possible, and that accountability expectations are met. Tax credits are a direct diversion of tax dollars. Money that would have been collected through taxes to benefit the entire community is diverted and ultimately ends up in the control of private institutions. If we're going to remove public dollars from under the responsibility of locally elected boards of education by directing them to privately controlled institutions, then at the very least, we need to ensure accountability in the following ways. Amend the bill to clearly state that all qualified schools must adhere to anti-discrimination laws. Qualified schools adhere to the same reporting requirements as public schools, including reporting the percentage of at-risk students, along with the percentage of students with an individual education plan or IEP, and that qualified schools must be subject to the same audit requirements as all public schools are, including contractual and financial audits. These points are provided in the written testimony, and I want to thank you for taking time to hear this testimony.
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, we do have 11 letters of written testimony. I want to draw your attention to that. I'm now going to open it up for questions for those individuals that provided opposition testimony. Do we have any questions? We have questions? Okay, Senator Sykes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think this question is probably for Mr. Bowie. Did I say that correct? Thank you. I know other people hit on this as well, but you were the first. But we were talking about working together with the public and private schools, especially with special education. And I think one of the other conferees talked about the IDEA rights and whether or not that would be severed if they went to a private school. Can you address that a little bit of how the public schools have partnered and offered those services and what that would do with funding if you were still required to do that, even though they want.
Sure. If the private school requests assistance with a student that has an IEP, there doesn't necessarily be anything that would be severed. It would be the responsibility of the public schools to provide that service to those students. And what it goes on there is an agreement between the private school and the public school as far as where that student's going to be served, what the time to be served would be. And so it puts the burden back on the public school to make that work. I was on the call this afternoon with one of our public school superintendents, and they have two private schools in the community plus them, and but at one co-op that serves all those kids. And so she said it does put a burden a little bit on the limited staff they have, because special education is hard. So that those staff members are trying to go between the schools to meet the services for those kids.
Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of clarifications, and this is to anyone who would like to answer it, but it's my understanding that in order to participate in this program, you have to be accredited, and all accredited schools must report their data, their test results, their demographics to KSDE, the same as any public school. That's my understanding. Is that not correct? And then I do have a couple others, Madam Chair.
Dr. Shropshire, we're glad you're here today so that you can just keep coming back up and give us those answers. Thank you.
That's exactly right. We have to be accredited and have the same reporting as other public schools.
I think the difference is if private schools choose to, they can, but I don't think it's in law, in statute, that they have to. If they choose to go through the KISA process, that information's there for the department to determine if they meet the qualifications.
But I believe that to participate in this program, they must be accredited through KSDE, which would mean that they would, so that they do have that accountability measure, correct?
Through KSDE, they have to be an accredited school, and there's other ways to be accredited.
But they do, to my knowledge, every school that participates does report their data to KSDE. Is that not correct?
I think that we will need to, because I'm hearing yes and I'm hearing no, so that will be an ask of the Kansas Department of Education. Your follow-up questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've also heard it mentioned that this is taking taxpayer money away from public schools. My understanding is this does not take any money nor affect the Gannon nor the school finance formula. It uses scholarship money, not taxpayer money, to fund these scholarships. Is that correct?
Madam Chair, this is
Yes,
Mark
Mr.
Tallman. I think the distinction is this is set up so that it is not funded by general fund contributions, but because they are tax credits, it is a reduction to the tax revenues of the state. So that's the distinction. It reduces the dollars. I'm sorry.
So clarify, the question was taking tax dollars or taking funding from our schools. Is that, did I understand?
Yes, thank you, Madam. That is correct. I understand, but it does not take money away from public schools.
It does not, this program does not reduce funding directly from public schools. It does reduce the pool of money available through the state general fund.
Or other programs or other allocated.
Yes.
Okay. Did you have another follow-up question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll yield my time. I see other folks have questions as well. Thank you.
Senator O'Shea.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was curious, how much does it cost the state to educate a child going through private school?
Libby Knox, would you please come up here?
The aggregate figures that have been confirmed by the Kansas Department of Education put it just over $16,000 per student. That includes state, local, and federal funds combined. So.
Educate a private student?
To educate a student in the public schools.
Okay.
And
So ask your question. I
Yeah,
guess.
how much does it cost the state to educate a child in a private school?
it doesn't cost the state to educate a private school student. What this program does,
Right.
as was explained,
So every student who goes to a private school is essentially freeing up the money that is available for the public schools, right? Like
this is
it's
the burden on the public school to educate
right.
the child. And there is a $10 million cap on the program, so it cannot, and this bill proposition does not affect that.
So my
yes.
next question was going to be, when people get a tax credit for donating to the scholarship fund, how much of a tax credit do they get for donating? So how much is the state?
70% of their donation
up
is up to the limit, I believe, for a corporate or individual donor is up to $500,000. But last year, only about 2.47 million in credits were given through the program, so it is not even close to the $10 million cap for 632 students total.
Thank you. So what I'm getting at is, what is that trade-off? Is, okay, yes, the state's getting less for the general fund, but they're also receiving more by not having to educate one more child. And what is
exactly.
that? What is that amount? I would, I'd like to analyze that more.
Well,
Thank you.
Senator, if I may, the savings that the 632 students currently represent, with the confirmed numbers from the Kansas Department of Education, would put the savings to the Kansas taxpayer at beyond $10 million already. So even the small number of students that are currently benefiting from the low-income student scholarship are saving the taxpayers far more than it's costing the state general fund, not the state education funds.
Thank you very much. Senator Petty.
I almost forgot my question listening. I would just say that question about savings to the state, I think it's pretty hard to.
I need you to speak into your mic.
Sorry, come up with a set amount, since we also know that services have to be provided for students, for students that are special needs, whether they are in a public school or in a private school. So if they have an IEP, the public school is providing those services. My question is to Mark Tolman. And Mark, I just wanted to confirm, I think you said that about, would you give those percentages again about free and reduced numbers, a percentage of students presently?
Percentage I could find at the department website is that about 35.6% of probably last year's enrollment was free lunch eligible, and 9% was reduced lunch eligible.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay.
Yes, Senator Straub.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Not to beat this horse again, but the savings to the state, just by quick calculations of using approximately $4,700 in base aid per pupil funding for 632 students would be $2.97 million. And I think, what's her name, had just said that $2.47 million in tax credits. So if donors are contributing $2.47 million at a 70% tax credit, it is quite a savings to the state. And also because free and reduced lunches are a criteria for weighting, it saves the state even more. We talked about this the other day, the weighting, the funding per pupil was, I believe, if you just figured an average across the state, and of course this isn't an average for every school district, but each actual student in the state of Kansas is approximately worth 1.5 students. So just to clarify some of those numbers.
Thank you. Committee, any other questions? Senator Petty.
Thank you. Madam Chair, aren't our public schools responsible to have to educate every child in the state of Kansas? if they're of age.
If they're enrolled in the school, yes.
So
If they're enrolled in the school.
But this does not, our public schools are open to every child of age in the state of Kansas. That's correct. But this program, we're talking about private schools that are not necessarily open to every child of age in the state of Kansas.
Well, one of the things that I believe that we did hear in our testimony is the private schools are bound by the same federal regulations that they are bound that they cannot discriminate in any manner. I believe that I heard that testimony. Who presented that testimony?
I believe that was me, Madam Chair. Ross Izzard at ACE Scholarships. And it is true that federal anti-discrimination law applies equally. There are some small exemptions for religious providers based on faith, but beyond that, all of the same anti-discrimination laws that apply federally to really any entity out there, whether it be a business or a school, are in effect for private schools by default. So in some cases, the language of a state bill might include that, just to reiterate it. But that doesn't necessarily change the responsibilities that the schools have when it comes to their day-to-day operations.
Thank you very much. I'm going to now, I'm sorry, did you have a follow-up question? No, I think that we did. You gave up your time so that others could ask, so we will finish up with your last questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a quick statement. It's not necessarily true that all public schools have to take all students. There are boundary requirements. There are students who are expelled from public school that aren't part of the school system. And ultimately, why wouldn't we want to give every child, regardless of income, regardless of what community they live in, give their parents the opportunity, the choice? We're not saying they have to take this and go anywhere else. But if they choose that that's the best setting for their child, it doesn't take any money from taxpayers, and let parents choose the best setting for their child, not constrained because of their income or their location. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Before we leave, I think we have two pieces of business. First thing, I'm going to call on our assistant, committee assistant. What questions do you have down that we are asking the Department of Education? Okay. I have down that we are wanting to know how many kids we want to clarify or validate the numbers as the number that this year are in free lunch and reduced lunch. I think that we also wanted to get the information as far as what the requirements are to be an accredited school and what reports it is that our private accredited schools provide to the Department of Education. We also want to know any information that the Department of Education has. This is my new ask. Any new information for the last 5 years that the Department of Education would have as far as students that have participated in the scholarship program before. And I know that we heard testimony at least at Holy Savior Catholic Academy, the testimony was a 99% graduation rate. So we do want to know what is happening with regard to progress, either through standardized testing, moving forward to the next grade, or actual graduation, any information that they have with that regard. Committee, do we have any other asks? Yes, Senator Straub.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can I add one more specific request to that?
Yes.
It's my understanding that private homeschools are considered non-accredited private schools in Kansas. Can we get clarification on that?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely. At this time, I am closing the hearing for Senate Bill 61. And our last piece of business, are there any bill introductions? Sorry, it should have been our first piece of business, but we're going to finish with that. Saying none, our meeting is adjourned. Thank you.